And there we are.
Cool.
We are live. I'm hoping that it went live on YouTube, though.
We're waiting. Like
It totally did.
waiting.
Great. Sweet. All right.
Cool.
How many people have we got? We got 4 people. 7 people. Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. Like there. Lots of people coming in. 7 people. Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. All right, cool. I don't know if we want to wait for a bunch of other people to come through and see how we go. In the meantime, hello, Andre.
Andre has some fans.
Check that guy. Yeah, lots of fans. Andre, is it good to be back, dude?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no.
What's wrong?
Well, as you can
Oh.
see.
Load shedding. Wow, look at that, hey.
Gosh, man. That's proper.
That's terrible. Shame.
Do this.
Oh, there we go. We got some more people. Hey, look at that. Nice. Okay, well, that's great. Okay, so we're getting some people. That's
Cool,
awesome.
cool.
All right. I think maybe do we give it a little bit longer? Do you guys want to talk about news and stuff, or do you want to jump straight into sessions? I think one big thing that I would really like to share with everybody today, and hopefully they get to see it when they're on the when they're watching the recording, is Azure Archive Storage, guys. Archive storage is now available in South Africa, right?
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah, something that we've been wanting for a really long time. So super glad it's here, hey?
Yeah, that's awesome, because I mean that allows people to actually use that storage, especially for the policies, like not having your stuff stored overseas.
Yeah, super, super fun. So that's
That is
some good stuff.
amazing.
And yeah.
So cool.
Andre, anything new from your end?
We now have capacity in the South African North Data Center, so we can create stuff.
I knew that was going to come up. Yes, indeed.
That has made me happier than anything else in Azure in the past month.
Oh yeah, no, same here, dude. Same here for sure. Check, even Jonathan. Yes, that's for sure, pal. Right, good. Okay, so then I think let me do some intros. I'm here with Carike and Andre today. The legend has returned to the Azure user groups, and we have a new legend presenting what for the first time now, hey?
Yeah, on the Azure group, yes.
That's fantastic. Apologies for making this virtual. It was supposed to be physical, but Microsoft is having their beginning of year kickoff, and we weren't allowed to use the venue. It was chaos there today. They were busy doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So as of next month, it'll be back in person in Johannesburg. And then hopefully in Cape Town, we're going to be finding a venue. Or alternatively, we'll have to wait until the Microsoft offices have been renovated. But we'll definitely feed back more information around that. When it comes to the sessions today, I'm going to hand over the reins to Carike shortly, where we're going to be going through something really awesome, where we're taking a bit of Power Platform, and we're taking a bit of Azure, and we're putting them together, and we're going to make teams request resources in Azure, which I think is pretty powerful because, we have a lot of end users, developers and things that know nothing about Azure, but they need resources in Azure. So this way what they can do is they can go in, they can request the resource in Azure. There's an approval workflow, and this kicks off automatically in the background. And then all of a sudden you have this Azure resource that they can use, which is really, really cool. So we've done something quite simple there. And you can obviously expand on it as you go along. And then Mr. Keartland is going to be taking us through some security stuffs, which is great for a change, but Azure Front Door, but an application gateway. And that's going to end us off. Please do post your questions in the comments, and we will definitely answer them verbally.
Yes.
And yeah. I will then hand over to Carike. Carike, I'm going to share your screen, so please make sure it's clean.
Super. I'm ready. I'm ready.
Go for it.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and this opportunity. So yeah, I'm going to start by showing you just by show of, you can use the best emoticon you want, but just by a show of emoticons, which of you know or have heard of Power Apps? Just let me know. I'll check the comments when I can, just out of curiosity, because I know it's been like quite a topic. It's been a topic for quite a few years already, but I find that many corporates are only talking about that buzzword now in South Africa. But it has been something that's been around for a while. Oh, cool. There's quite a few. I love it. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I've got Teams open in the browser. And what I absolutely loved is, you know how sometimes you've got functionality that don't work in the Teams browser, but it works on the Teams desktop app? I was ecstatic to see that building a Power App in Teams is still available using Teams in the browser. So I've got a little demo environment that we spun up here. I'm going to show you first just how easy it is to create a Power App. So it's as simple as clicking on these three dots, which allow you to add apps either for your org, for your organization at an organization level, or you can add it for a team. So when you select Power Apps, when you do it like this, when you go Power Apps, what this app does is it gives you the Power Apps functionality, like when you would normally navigate to Power Apps, create.powerapps.com. This one allows you to create your apps for a specific team inside of Teams. So there's no need to browse away from Teams. You can just develop the app right here, which is pretty cool. And you develop it specifically for a team. So it's also something to note is when you go to your Power Apps environment, something I didn't see is I didn't see the app available inside of there because you're building it through Teams, right? So I'll show you the app that we've built so far. I called it Request Azure VM. I'm just going to open it. And you get like a full suite, you get your proper full suite Power Apps designer. So you can build a form, you can build an introduction template. Let's say you want to take your staff through how-tos or give some development practices. You can build an app for that and just implement it in the team. And whoever is added to that team, they can just navigate through that. Just waiting for this. Microsoft wants your feedback. Nice. I'll give it to them later. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit because I know the designer is like super small. So what I did was to create this. I just want to let me just hide that. To create this form, so obviously you can choose to create your fields custom. You can create custom fields, have people capture the information, and you choose your data source of where you want this information stored. Or you can have, what I have in this instance is a SharePoint list that was created prior to this app. And when I clicked on insert, I could actually say edit form, and I made the data source the SharePoint list, which I'll show soon. And then it actually creates this format for you. Let me just delete that. It actually creates this form for you with the fields. And then from there, you can choose which fields you want from that SharePoint list. So if I click on, just to explain, sorry, because I'm talking as if everybody knows Power Apps. But on the left-hand side, you've got the elements that you've got on the page. So we've got your main screen, which we start with. Then you can put screen containers. So you can have a header, a main section, and a footer. This just helps with the responsive design, right? So you don't have to worry about or too much about, figuring out the designing spectrum. I don't know why it moved that. I'm not going to save that. Anyways, then, so I actually just wanted to show you the form. So when you use the data source for SharePoint, you can actually choose the fields you want to show on the form and which ones not. So yeah, we've got all the fields that we are using inside of SharePoint, but if you wanted to remove one, you would just move it down or remove it. It's very simple and it's super easy, and it really is just as simple as that. And then once you're done, you simply click on save. I shouldn't have done that, but that's fine. And then you can actually publish it to your team. So you can also download a copy of the solution. So let's say you built something in a dev environment or in a team, specific team that's for dev. You can download a copy and upload it to the other team, which is pretty cool. So that's just around creating the app. So this is the design view of it, right? So if you want to look at how it's being used, you click on Teams. So I've added it to Team Azure Dev because that's how we do things. And then you will see that that app was added as a tab inside of that team. So I just want this app to load. And this is what your completed app looks like. This is what your users will see. And then whenever you make changes, you just publish the app and it will be visible to the users as soon as they start using the app. If you've got any questions, please just put them in the comments. And if I'm going too fast, just stop me. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and fill out the details of this form, and then I'm going to move over to the SharePoint side. So let me show you the SharePoint side first so that you know that I'm actually legit adding this thing. So what I have is, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with SharePoint. So what I did was I created a SharePoint list with all the fields that I wanted to use in the app. These are some of the ones that I've been playing with, me and Warren both. So when I add a new record, it's going to be inside of this one, right? And the list is simple. I mean, when you want to create a new list inside of SharePoint, you just go site contents, and you would go new, and you choose list. And the same thing would have worked with the document library. Everywhere where you can have columns that can contain data, you can use that as a data source. So, I mean, if you wanted to not use SharePoint, you wanted to use an Excel spreadsheet, you could have easily done that. If you wanted to use SQL Server, you could have easily used that as your data source. But just note that when you do use SQL Server, that becomes a premium connector. And obviously, whenever it has the word premium connected to it, it means you have to pay some money. So SharePoint and like the Excel spreadsheets, those are connectors that come out of the box when you have a Microsoft Office 365 license. So with premium connectors, you have to buy an additional like specific Power Apps license or a Power Automate license. So I'm just going to go ahead and let's go and create ourselves or request ourselves a VM. So I'm going to go Azure User Group July 2022 VM. Let's give it a resource group name. So we went with the limited amount of fields that you need to create a virtual machine. And we've got the location. We've got pre-populated because we don't want people typing things and getting it wrong. So let's go with South Africa North. Operating system or image type. Let's go for Windows 2016 data center. Virtual machine size, we'll go with the standard one. And here for tags, please excuse the lack of creativity for me to choose some tags. I was just like choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. But you can choose multiple tags. This will be when you want to like add some tags to this virtual machine. We haven't built that functionality in, but it's a possibility of what you can do. So let's go submit request. And your request has been submitted successfully. So just note, I mean, all of this was done through Teams. I didn't actually access Azure once. I didn't have to fill in any credentials. This is just me as a user or maybe a developer. I am in need of a virtual machine to do whatever with, and here I can request that virtual machine. So what happens is, first of all, if we go to our list, you'll notice that the entry has been made with all the options that I've
also picked. A great way of logging it, huh?
I know. You can like
And
keep
you can
proper
see
track.
what was requested in SharePoint as opposed to going to the activity log somewhere else. It's
That's so
quite cool.
true. That is pretty cool. It actually just made me think of something now as well.
That's for the next one, yeah.
Opportunities. Cool. So the entry's added there. And what we have here is a request status. So that field was not available on the form, but this is handled through Power Automate. It will handle when the requests come in and it will say requested. Then it will notify the submitter if an approver has approved or not. So I'm going to move over to the workflow now to walk you through the steps that we have inside of the workflow. So we have the user that's requesting this resource that they want right now, which is a virtual machine. But what happens as soon as they submitted their request? So I'm just going to go into flow. So what we have is, this is Power Automate. I'm sure most of you have heard of this as well. It's the workflow part of the Power Platform. And the opportunities inside of this tool is absolutely amazing. I mean, there's so much you can do with Power Automate. It's ridiculous. So what we have is we've got a workflow, automated flow, that is listening when an item is created in SharePoint. So we gave it the site address for our SharePoint site, which is Team Azure Dev, and we provided it the list name. So all of it's based on a drop-down basis, which is so cool because, I mean, Power Automate picks up on what is already in your Office environment. Then, and obviously it also depends on what the user who is creating this flow has access to. So let's say there's a SharePoint site that I, as a user, do not have access to. It won't come up in the drop-down because I don't have access to that resource. And then you can choose your list name. So on this site, we only have this one list. And that's just listening when an item is created, which in this event we just did. Then what happens is we start and wait for an approval. So this is an action item that you can select from inside of Power Automate. Oh gosh, there's an admin now. I'm just kidding. Because this is a demo site, I don't really care. So the approval type is approve/reject, which means everyone must approve, but you've got a whole bunch of options that you can use here. You can make it an approve and reject one where the first person to respond will take that item forward. In our event, we said everyone must approve. So let's say you have 2 or 3 approvers. So this thing has to go, because obviously we know with Azure, there's some credits involved and all of that. You don't want everybody requesting and someone who perhaps isn't aware of the credits just approving, because it's my teammate. So yeah, everything's cool. So that's why we say everyone must respond. But you can also add custom responses, right? It doesn't have to be approve or reject. It could be whatever you want it to be, to say yay or nay. Okay. Then we just give it a short title so that the approver at least knows what this approval is for, who it is assigned to. So normally you select a person here. It will integrate with Active Directory. So you can select whoever is the responsible person from Active Directory. And by adding dynamic content, I mean, you could easily...
There's a question there from Jonathan. I don't know if you saw it.
I haven't.
How do you handle VM validation and notification if the entries do not align to the schema? So what happens if the VM name is too long or has spaces? Can you do validation on that field?
You can definitely do validation on that field. So you would need to know what validation Azure is looking for on Azure side. If I'm correct on that part, Warren, you can just help me from the Azure perspective. Mm-hmm. But from a Power Platform perspective, you can definitely put validation on your fields and say that I want this field to, for instance, just have numbers or just capital letters or no spaces, like you mentioned, Jonathan.
Cool.
Definitely something that's doable. Super. I hope I answered his question. Cool. So yeah, so you can assign this approval. So the assign to field here is who needs to approve this task. So it can either be it could be an individual, or what you could do, and this is something that I sometimes suggest to clients as well, is create another SharePoint list where you go, perhaps you call it first approver, second approver, or line manager, and all those kind of things, and you populate the people column for those approvers. And then instead of having the email addresses here that are hard-coded in here, you just select first approver or second approver, and you can select it from the fields that's made available by the action items that you use. So something that's cool about Power Automate, so all the field, when I've used this, when an item is created, there's fields that's available with dynamic, the dynamic content that I can now access because I've got this item here at the top. And then as you go down, like every time you add an action, both of these, the content will be available so that I can use it as I progress downward on this Power Automate flow, which just makes it easier. Like, you know, when something needs to change, you can change it from a SharePoint perspective and don't necessarily have to come into Power Automate to update that. That's why I'm suggesting the list as well. So if you had first approver here with a value that's coming from a list in SharePoint, you just update that item in SharePoint. You don't have to come to an actual workflow to update that. Cool. So that was that bit. Then just details is just details regarding the request. So if you wanted to add like who it was created by, if you wanted to know what the values for the field was to better evaluate your decision, you could have added all of them there. So I could have gone, and put VM name or resource group name. I could have put all of them there just to give as much information as possible to the approver so that they know what they're approving, right? And then item link is something that's made available because of the SharePoint step. It's also, you get the link to item field that you can use, and the description once again, just so that when I'll show you now what when the approval request comes in, that's what you get. And then we've got some advanced options where you can enable notifications or you can disable it. You can enable reassignment or disable it. It all depends on you. And you can even add attachments to your approval tasks. So let's say it's maybe a PDF that someone needs to sign off actually before they just click on approve. You can do that. So that's that for the approval step. Then next on our workflow, what we've got is a condition step where based on the outcome of the previous approval, if that is equal to approved, then we've got a set of actions. If it's yes, that needs to happen, or if it's no, we've got a set of action that needs to happen on that side. So obviously, if it's no, we need to update the status in SharePoint to reject it. And we need to let the submitter know that, hey, your item has been rejected. So also just to show you, these are all action steps. And once again, you just provide the site address, your list name, you give the ID of the record that you want to update, and the title. So I've renamed the title column to VM name, and that's the one that we want to update now with the value, request status value of rejected. And it also, you'll notice that it picks up on the statuses that you have in your list. So I've got currently my request status values are approved, created, rejected, and requested. So if I were to add a status on SharePoint, it will pull through for Power Automate, which is really just a proof of how well integrated everything is with each other. So and then obviously we just send an email using an Outlook connector saying it must go to the person who created its email and just giving them reasons why it's rejected. Cool, that's in the event if it was rejected. If it is approved, we do the same thing. We set the status to approved. We send an email. And then what we do is something fun. We have a runner flow built with Power Automate for desktop. So something I didn't specify when I started with Power Automate is you get Power Automate, which we call cloud, Power Automate cloud, because you're building flows in the browser. And then you get Power Automate for desktop. It's very similar to Power BI online and Power BI desktop, but it's not the same, but similar. anyways, so what you could do is from a Power Automate Cloud, you can actually kick off a Power Automate desktop workflow. And what you need to do is you need to select the desktop flow that you need to want to run. You choose whether it's attended or not, or unattended. Then once again, I'll show you now from the desktop perspective. So from the Power Automate desktop flow, we actually specified some variables that needs to be populated. And these are the variables that gets pushed to that desktop flow. So we're getting this from SharePoint, and now we're going to push it to the desktop flow. Now, Power Automate for desktop, the reason it's for the desktop is for allowing people to also do robotic processing automation. So it's more for when you need to actually access desktop applications. So that's what makes Power Automate desktop so powerful. So just to show you the flow, and you will be shocked. This is the step that we have in Power Automate desktop. Amazing, isn't it? Just one step. That's all we needed. And then we've got the variables here. So we've got location, operating system, password, resource group. So all the variables that you would need for your PowerShell script, you can specify here, and it can be populated once again from any data source that you want. If you wanted to get it from SQL, you could have easily just connected to SQL from the Power Automate desktop. But since we are using SharePoint, there's no connection between Power Automate desktop and SharePoint. So we're kicking this off via Power Automate Cloud. If I'm talking a bit messy, please excuse me, but I'm happy to answer any questions. So that's that. So, sure.
Can the approver change things such as the resource group's Vnet during the approval process in case the requester doesn't know or chose the wrong resource group?
Ooh, that's a good one. So at this point, no. At this point, I don't think the approver can change the resource group, but it's something that you can build in. That's a good possibility. That's something that you can make available to the approver. Like we can actually see if you look at the item, perhaps they can, because the approval step happens before we kick off this Power Automate for desktop flow. So
the approver can modify it before it hits the list.
Yeah, I think so. I actually don't know. It's something we can test while we do it. I haven't thought of that scenario yet, but that's a really good question, and it is definitely something worthwhile trying because it makes sense. I mean, if someone's requesting a virtual machine, since they don't know a lot about Azure, they could possibly or potentially choose the wrong information, and that's why it needs to go through an approval, right? So that's a really good question. We'll see when I show you the approval part.
Cool.
Okay, and I see Jonathan says make a drop-down list instead of free text. Yeah, so that's what we did actually with SharePoint. Is we put the values in drop-down fields like South Africa North, South Africa West, those kind of things that people can mistype. You know, we've made that into drop-downs, and you can populate it as far and wide as you want, so that everybody just go select instead of type. Super. And then lastly, once the Power Automate desktop flow has completed running, and it means it completed the PowerShell script run, what it does, it updates the item status to created. So I should actually wish we could have put in another notification to let the submitter know that, hey, your item has been created and here's the credentials that you need to use. So, but that's that for the flow part. So just to show you that the approval did come through the last time I captured this form, you will see that in Teams, an activity will come up saying that you have a request, and it tells you that it's a request for a VM to be created. And this is what the approval will look like when it comes through to the approver. So it's saying that request for VM to be created. This person is requesting a new VM to be created in Azure. You've got some attachments. So let's see if we click the attachment, what happens. It actually shows you the item. And it looks like you can edit it, just to answer Jonathan's question. that could be a good and a bad thing, thinking about it now. But it can be edited. And then the approver will be able to look at all the fields, see if there's any attachments. And then if they're happy, they can, you also get like a nice feel like where it started, it was requested by this person, and now it's pending a response from this person. So you get a nice like detailed progress flow of how this process is going. So I will just go happy, let's do it. Not that a manager will ever tell you something like that. I'm a happy manager. So let's go approve. And it's submitting the response. And because I'm the same person who logged it, I'm also getting the status in my activity feed saying that it has been approved. And you'll notice that the comments is added for the person who approved it to say, happy, let's do it. So the feedback, and like you saw, is almost instant. And I also got an email to say that your request to have a VM created has been approved. And just to show you in SharePoint as well, that as soon as I refresh this list, our item will have a status of approved. And then once it has been created, the status will be updated to created. And then, Warren, I will be handing over to you.
Yep. Alrighty. And then what we can do is remove your screen, and we can go ahead and add mine. And you'll see basically something as simple as that, right? So we do a connect AZ account. Now, obviously, we're trying to keep this as simple as possible, right? So with this being connected to Power Automate Desktop, you don't want, well, you can't exactly log on to the PowerShell session. So what we do is we run a connect AZ account with a certificate, and the certificate's been uploaded to a service principal that's been created inside of Azure. That obviously has the role of contributor, whatever the case may be, is so that it can create the virtual machine and the resources it needs to create. We then import that certificate into the machine that's running Power Automate Desktop, and it can then do the Connect AZ account, no problems. It selects the subscription. It then takes the variables that have been pushed in via Power Automate that received from the SharePoint list. So you can see lines 4 to 10, give or take. And then what it does is it converts to secure string for the password. That password and username information that you entered into the Teams application will then become the username and password of the virtual machine that gets created. It then creates the Azure resource group, and then it fires off a new AZ VM at the end, which is line 26. So that is in my Git repo. I mean, more than happy to use it if you need to. And we can make it more complicated if we want to. But I mean, the idea is just to show you what's possible, but by using end user tools here, right? So you don't actually have to be an Azure administrator. You can literally do this without any sort of advanced DevOps knowledge like Jonathan. Don't have to create crazy runbooks or anything like that. It's just a simple PowerShell script that you can Google. Alternatively, you can even take one of the Azure quick starts and then just change the variables inside of that PowerShell. It'll then kick off this flow, and hopefully it ran. Did it run? I don't even know.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. And then we can go into Azure, and there we go. That guy created. There we go. And there you see the network security group and the virtual network and all the bits and pieces that are needed for that specific resource to live. And you can obviously customize this as we go along. And there you go. We're busy creating a virtual machine, and it should be done in a couple of minutes. So you can specify the location. And again, you said that there's a whole bunch of bits of, and yes, correct. Power Automate Desktop is not really a necessity. I mean, the ideal way to do this would definitely be a function in Logic App, because then what you can also do is in a compliant environment, you could also then, let's say, have that function running inside the network. Conditional access policies can get access to all the other resources inside the virtual networks that are inside that specific environment. So casualty, yeah, for sure, definitely. And there we go. So that's just sort of a brief automation with Power Automate. And you can see it was all built through GUI too, right? Which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for that demo. Well done. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank
Carike.
you. Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to see it finish.
Yeah, I get that. I get
It's
that. And just to add to the comment as well, Power Automate Desktop probably wasn't necessary. You could still create a Power App hosted in Teams, and maybe by the submit button, have it from there kick off the Azure Logic app or the Azure function. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. It's like you said, Warren, this is to show that there's so many different ways to do things these days. You know, it all depends on the needs of the client.
Yeah, 100%. So that's great. Thank you.
Cool.
And now
thanks.
that we are 35 minutes in, well done. Thanks very much. If there's no other questions, we'll give it a couple seconds. I'm going to add the legend himself to the stream. Hello, Andre. Welcome back.
Hello. Audio working?
And,
Camera working?
Yeah, sound is working. You're good to go. Share your screen though.
Let me share a screen. Give me a second.
There we go.
Okay, this is not a Microsoft app. One of the weird things, you can't double click on the screen and it shares. You've got to look for the little button that says share and click that. Okay, I have now shared. Is anybody else seeing it? I can't see it on the
Yes.
YouTube.
Yeah, we can see. All good.
How about the guys out there in YouTube world?
The guys out there in
the
YouTube world can see it too.
and
Yeah, sure.
I am neither seeing myself nor seeing my screen.
I can see your screen from YouTube world.
We can see you just fine.
Okay,
Everything's working.
Okay, cool. Then let's get cracking on this. Okay, so welcome. They ran out of topics to talk about, so they wrote me in. So I'm going to talk about application delivery. So in case you haven't met me before, my name is Andre Keartland. I'm a solutions architect, but I'm the sort of architect that actually does work at a company called Netsurit. And to make this worthwhile, I can brag for a second. So Netsurit does a lot of cloudy stuff. We build a lot of the really big Azure implementations all over South Africa. And the topic that I want to discuss is application delivery. So in other words, you've got Azure, you've got some apps sitting inside of it, specifically web-facing applications. They're probably running on an app service. They might still be running on a VM, might be some APIs, might be functions, and you want to get them out there securely into the world. Now, those of you that have been around for a while might recall that back in the day, we used to do a lot of like reverse proxies and firewalls for websites and applications. Any of you that ever put an Exchange server onto the internet would have been publishing your Exchange server CAS, the cloud application or client application server, through something like a Forefront TMG or something similar, reverse proxy. And Microsoft had a whole series of these on-premises reverse proxy services. So they had Threat Management Gateway, and then they had UAG, Universal Application Gateway, all in increasing sophistication. But their purpose was more or less the same. What they would do is they would sit in front of your application server. Connections coming in from the internet would hit the publishing device first. That device would look at that incoming connection, inspect it, look for threats, look for somebody trying to do something dangerous, maybe filter out some of the connections that looked a bit suspect, and then only let through the good stuff. And then when it published out the content, it would typically also act as a proxy. So it was theoretically improving the performance of this web application, because a lot of the content was not being served by the application server. It was being done by this proxy server. Okay. And then in about 2013, all of us got a huge shock because suddenly Microsoft just pulled all of these products and they just went off the market. Okay. And everybody thought Microsoft was nuts, really irritated a lot of people, especially people like me that used to make a lot of money out of deploying these servers. Suddenly we just didn't have this product anymore. But a lot of the talk at the time was saying Microsoft is probably pulling it because they're going to replace it with cloud services, because Azure was just sort of starting to poke its nose over the wall. Okay. And sure, Microsoft did come out, not just with like one gateway, but a whole suite of different application publishing or application delivery services that all did different aspects of this application delivery as cloud services. Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of these and I'm going to try and unpack them. We don't have time to go through every single one of them, but I'm just going to take this one slide to just quickly just set the scene. So essentially, these services between them do that thing that I said the proxy servers used to do back on premises. Okay, so they will sit in front of a web application. User connections coming in from the internet will hit the service first. The service will do some sort of filtering or protection, or add the secret source, and then let through the safe connections to the application at the back end, and sometimes do a bit of a performance enhancement as well by maybe taking some of the workload off that application server and doing some pre-processing or caching or something similar to improve performance. Okay, so if we look across this suite, just quickly giving you sort of the one sentence description of each one of them. Okay, so the CDN is the content delivery network, which purely does caching. Okay, its purpose is there's a lot of Microsoft point of presence in different data centers all over the world. Each one of them basically has a big amount of storage, and they take some of the content out of your web applications and they cache them into these locations. When users hit your application, then the network will go and try and find the closest CDN point that has that content and pull some of the static content out of the CDN cache and deliver that to the users. So first of all, they're not coming back to your server. Your server works less hard. But second of all, it also means that the user is getting that content from a closer point to them. So if your web server is sitting in South Africa North, but the user that's hitting it is sitting in Japan, then using the CDN, you can ensure that if you've got big images or other static content inside of your website, that Japanese user could be pulling it from a Japanese data center, although the central core app functionality is still sitting in South Africa. Okay, so in that way, it helps performance, but it's not really a security component. Another one, Azure Traffic Manager, is basically a global DNS service. And all it does is you can go and register FQDN, www.contoso.com, and you map that to multiple endpoints. So www.contoso might point to server 1 in South Africa, server 2 in Japan, server 3 in Europe, server 4 in North America somewhere. And then you can set rules where you can, for instance, say, depending on where the user is coming from, if they're coming from Asia, send them to the Japanese server. If they're coming from Europe, send them to the European server. Why? Again, improves performance, but it also gives me fault tolerance, because now if the whole South Africa North region were to go down, then the traffic manager can still redirect the users to one of the others. Okay, but doesn't really add much security, doesn't add a heck of a lot of intelligence. It's really just a DNS service. Okay, then we've got the various load balancers. So we've got the load balancer, which is essentially doing in the cloud, in Azure, what a classic load balancer used to do in our data center. Okay, so something like a F5 or a Kemp device. So it's essentially sitting on my network, getting traffic into a single IP address, and then redistributing it to multiple backend servers. Okay, so maybe I've got a farm consisting of 5 web servers, and all of them are being published as www.contoso.com. All requests for contoso.com comes to one IP address, which is the IP address of the load balancer. The load balancer has an algorithm that says, take 20% of all of the requests coming in and send it to each one of the 5 servers. Okay, if I lose one of the servers, then just redistribute the traffic to the remaining servers. It gives me availability, but it can also, again, allow me to scale by distributing across multiple servers. Now, I can do the same thing in Azure. I can build a load balancer resource, which gives me those same benefits, but essentially it's still limited to an inside the virtual network function. Okay, there's newer and more interesting load balancer options. There's now something called a global load balancer, just to confuse things. But essentially, a load balancer doesn't add particular security functionality, doesn't add a lot of intelligence and traffic handling. It's really just saying, take traffic, use an algorithm, distribute. Okay. More intelligent. Now we start moving up the stack a little bit. Literally, if we take the Aussie model, you know, which all of you hated to study if you learned networking, but a load balancer is essentially operating at the level of TCP/IP. Okay, it's a layer 3, layer 4 device. Okay, application gateway does exactly the same thing, but is now a layer 7 device. Okay, layer 7 application protocols. So this is where it understands protocols like HTTP, HTTPS, and it can now unpack the HTTP requests. And based on what's inside of there, based on particular strings on the URL that is being requested, it can now start doing all sorts of fancy redirection and load balancing, which I'll give you some examples of. We'll spend some time in the application gateway, but it starts doing a more intelligent load balancing. At the same time, because we're now unpacking those packets or unpacking those requests at layer 7, we can also start saying, well, is that a safe request? Is there something about that request that is hiding away some sort of security threat? Okay, which is where we can now go and marry the application gateway to the next item over, the web application firewall, and now also have a layer 7 security device that's busy saying, as this request is coming in, inspect it, look for dangerous traffic, filter it out, and then load balance the traffic intelligently towards the back end. We'll drill down into that for a bit more detail. Okay. Next service over, Azure Front Door, is very confusing because it does very much what the application gateway does, but with a slightly different architecture. And the one biggest fundamental difference between them, which you're going to see later on as I'm talking about it, is where the application gateway is restricted to a single Azure region at a time. The front door is a global service. Okay, so if all the servers that I'm wanting to protect and load balance are sitting inside of a single region, they're in South Africa North, then I could use the application gateway, one instance, and it could protect all of those servers that I'm running in South Africa North. Okay, but if I run multiple regions, if I have South Africa North and I have South Africa West and I have Europe West for DR purposes, then I'm going to need more than one application gateway because they can only really service one region at a time. The front door service is a global service. And when I send traffic to it, it's going to do very much the same function. It will receive the traffic, it will look at it, it will see if it's safe, it can integrate with the web application firewall, it can do security filtering, it can do advanced routing and say, this traffic needs to go to this server, that traffic needs to go to a different server, or even to a different region, but it can do so across regions. So if I have one front door and I'm publishing www.contoso.com through there, then that front door can then again do like the traffic manager did. It can say, oh, you're coming from Asia, I'm sending you to the Japanese instance of that web server or that web application. You're coming from somewhere in the US, I'm sending you to the server that I'm running in the East US, etc. Okay. Plus, I then have regional DR. So again, I lose the entire region, then front door can make sure that the traffic gets in where it needs to go. Okay. So you can see it gets a bit confusing, and that's why we're having this session. Okay, I'm going to try and unpack these a bit, show you when would I use one, when would I use the other, and what are some of the options I can use in there. Okay, the last two on this slide. API Manager, what I might be publishing might not be a fully fledged interactive traditional website that humans are connecting to and clicking through some sort of GUI interface. Okay, so what I might be using might be, or publishing, might just be APIs that some other application from a partner or a customer is busy accessing over the internet. Okay, and again, there are particular security and load balancing requirements around managing those APIs. Okay, so there's a dedicated API manager if that is my use case. The last one is DDoS. Okay, so distributed denial of service. This has traditionally been one of the oldest problems on the internet. You put up some sort of website or an application server, somebody picks up a fight with you, or they just want to irritate you, so they take a large number of computers and they simultaneously try and flood you with a whole bunch of requests or malformed traffic or something similar. And in this way, they try to just flood your infrastructure so that your network can't cope, your servers can't cope, etc. Eventually, your application becomes inaccessible, and essentially you are down. Even if they couldn't penetrate your servers, they just flooded your servers. Okay, so Ddos Protection is built into Azure, and you will see that all Azure network connections do have a certain amount of Ddos Protection built in, but there's a sort of enterprise level, okay, what they call the Ddos Protection Standard edition, that you can go and enable for particular websites or networks to provide an additional level of protection against DDoS attacks. Okay, and again, we will drill down a little bit into DDoS protection and see what's the options there. Okay. Feel free to pop questions into the chat. Warren, if somebody pops something into the questions and I don't see it, just shout it out and I'll take care of it immediately.
For sure, I will do.
Okay, so talking about security, just to understand what are we trying to protect ourselves against. Okay, the web application attack landscape, things that can happen to us that we need to protect ourselves against. First of all, there's DDoS attacks, which I've just mentioned. They can sometimes be terribly unsophisticated. Okay, it is just as simple as I'm just going to send you a bunch of packets, more so than what your servers can handle, and eventually nobody else can get in. Okay, it is the equivalent of if I just kept on dialing your phone number to the extent where nobody else could get a phone call to you. Same principle. Okay, sometimes they can be more sophisticated, especially if the way that somebody is launching this attack on you is also not they're taking their computer and just sending a whole lot of traffic your way, but they take control of a bunch of other people's computers. So you get one of these remote control vulnerabilities that gets exploited. Somebody maybe installs malware onto a whole bunch of machines. And now from these zombie machines that they've got control of, they now start launching the flood of requests, malformed connections, whatever it takes, that take you down. Okay, and these services are out there, they're rented out. Okay, so literally people write malware, they distribute them, they get them onto a whole bunch of computers all over the world, and then they take that as a service, they offer it, they advertise it out there on the dark web or wherever else, and they say to people, you want to do a DDoS attack, pay me X number of Bitcoin, and you can rent that army of machines. I've got so many thousands of, or tens of thousands of hosts under my control, and you pay me for a period of time, and we just run the software to take them down. Okay, so this could be quite a serious threat to anybody who is especially dependent on internet connectivity to do their business, which these days is basically just about everybody. But especially if you're in something like e-commerce, or you're somehow interacting with your customers through the internet, then a DDoS attack could actually end up costing you a lot of business and a lot of money, and they're really hard to fight. Okay, because to protect yourself against DDoS, really what you need is a very, very large infrastructure that can handle more requests than what the attacker can send at you. Okay, and sometimes these attacks don't have to be that large. Okay, so if your infrastructure can only handle 5,000 requests a minute, and somebody sends you 6,000 requests, okay, then they've already exceeded your capability and you already start having some sort of harm. So it's not necessarily that somebody has to go and coordinate 1 million zombie machines to attack you. Okay, second type of attack is web application attacks. So this is where somebody literally goes in and connects to a server through an open port. You're busy publishing your server. The name is out there. It's accessible through a firewall, and it's listening out for requests on port 80 or port 443, whatever other, and it's receiving HTTPS requests. Now, people can start exploiting vulnerabilities inside of those web servers themselves. Okay, maybe there is some sort of unpatched vulnerability in the web server, in the operating system underneath it, in the networking equipment it's connected to, and they start injecting malformed requests, or they send special little packets and special little requests that make the server do things that you didn't want it to do. And again, they can possibly take the server down, they can deface the system, they can log onto the server and use it as a platform to access other things. If you've been in IT for the last 20 odd years, you have probably heard of 100 of these types of attacks that have affected you or other networks or companies that you've been involved with. Okay, there's a myriad of these. So this is where an organization known as Owasp becomes relevant. Okay, so that is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's not a Microsoft thing. It's a industry consortium of people who've gotten together that try to identify generic threats to web application servers. And they publish these when they find them, and they also give guidance to say what are things that you need to do to protect yourself against that. So a lot of your vulnerability protection applications or vulnerability scanners will go scan for your OWASP vulnerabilities. And you're also going to see that tools like the Web Application Firewall from Microsoft, one of the things it does is it's sitting there looking for these vulnerabilities. So it's looking for the packets coming through it, the requests coming through, and it's trying to see, is anybody trying to exploit one of these vulnerabilities? So if you're running a web site or a web application, this is one of the things that you need to be looking at on a regular basis, is to say, am I open, am I vulnerable to any of the common OWASP vulnerabilities? And they specifically talk about the top 10 list. So every year, this organization publishes a list to say what are the 10 most biggest, most exploited vulnerabilities that you need to be looking out and that you particularly need to protect yourself against. Okay, and then bots. Now, I mentioned already earlier on that a lot of the attacks that are occurring is not some guy sitting in a basement wearing a hoodie, busy typing lines of code and sending them at your server. Okay, more often than not, the attack that's happening is utterly automated. All that's happened is somebody's going through a list of FQDNs, a list of IP addresses, they're doing port scans, they're trying to see what they can connect to. And when they find a machine that's listening, there's a live IP address, then they try and make connections to it, and they start doing queries and they try and do transactions against it to get information off that server. Okay, now these sort of operations are not always malicious. Okay, so things like search engines, Google operate, this is a Microsoft event, and Bing operate in exactly the same way. Okay, so they find an IP address, they find a server, and they connect to it, and they say, well, what's here? What can I find? What can I open? What links can I follow? And they're reading stuff and they're getting information out. Okay, so this can sometimes, of course, be the basis of various types of security attacks. This is very often where somebody's performing reconnaissance against a site in order to be able to figure out a way to perform a attack. So again, from your point of view as the protector, one of the things you want to do is you want to be able to see what bots are accessing me, what are they doing, and preferably, can I block some of them? Okay, especially if I know that certain types of behavior, certain types of queries, certain types of actions are representative of what a malicious bot would be doing, okay? Or if I can see that the traffic is coming from a machine that is out there on the internet that has been compromised and is now being used by someone else to launch bots out into the wild, okay? So again, you want a security solution that's going to be doing bot protection, okay? So let's drill into these various protection services. So the first one I'll look at is the Azure App Gateway. Okay, the App Gateway is, and initially, I'm not going to look at it specifically from a security point of view. Okay, so let's just start off by just saying the App Gateway is fundamentally a glorified load balancer. Okay, the one thing that differentiates it from your normal load balancing server or load balancing service. So remember I said the load balancing service operates by taking IP, so TCP IP requests come into it in a front-end interface, and it says, okay, cool, I'm receiving this traffic. What type of traffic is it? Oh, it's HTTPS. Do I have a rule for HTTPS? Yes, I do. It says I need to distribute this traffic amongst the following 5 machines at my back end. So it sends 20% of the traffic to each one of those 5 machines. Okay, mission accomplished. It is now distributing the traffic across multiple web servers. Okay, one of them goes down. It's running a probe. It detects, oh, that server is down. It's not receiving my HTTPS request anymore. So stop sending traffic to one of my servers. Keep on sending it to the other 4. Okay, so not a lot of intelligence in there. It's not really trying to figure out if it's good traffic, bad traffic. It doesn't really care. Okay, it's just sitting there operating layer 3, to an extent layer 4 in the Aussie model. It's really just handling IP and distributing it. So Application Gateway, I said a bit earlier on, is an example of a layer 7 load balancer. In other words, in the Aussie model, it's operating at the top layer, okay, the layer where the networking stack is interacting with applications. So at this layer, you've got application-specific protocols. So this is where you've got things like HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, SMTP, etc., that are specific to types of traffic and where the requests are formatted specifically in a way that is understood by an application server. It's not like TCP/IP that's general purpose and looks the same irrespective of what the protocol is that's or the application that's using it. Okay, so because we've got a application layer device that's operating at layer 7, it means it understands application protocols and application requests. Unfortunately, it does mean that it is specific to particular protocols. And in this case, it is very specialized. It literally only understands one thing, HTTP, HTTPS. Okay, can't use this to load balance FTP or SMTP or whatever other protocol you want to do. This is for web servers. Okay, it can do those 2 protocols. Okay, and because it understands the HTTP and HTTPS protocols, it can now do things like crack open a HTTP request, look at the URL that is being requested, that's being sent through, and then make routing decisions based on the full URL, not just on the IP address. Okay, so as an example, as is shown in this screenshot, where you have requests coming into contoso.com, but the URL might be www.contoso.com/images something, or the other one is /video something. And now it's actually cracking open that URL, and based on the bits after the host name, it's saying, oh, okay, this is for an images URL, send it to my image server. This is for a video URL, send it to my video server. Okay, or for a particular application or a particular type of request, send it to the specific host or hosts that are going to be able to service that request. Okay, so it's actually taking some of the decision making of how my application works away from those front-end servers. And then it can start doing other things for those servers. So it can take some of the load off. Okay, so for instance, TLS termination, transport layer security. What I can now have is that my encrypted session coming in from the client comes to the application gateway, which receives that connection, terminates the encrypted session, checks that it's a valid connection from the server at the other side, and it's respecting the right certificate, etc. Maybe stop the encryption and then send the traffic on to the backend servers, thus preventing that backend server from having to spend CPU cycles, etc., from actually doing that certificate and encrypted session processing. Even things like, maybe I now don't need to go and take my very sensitive and secure wildcard certificate and go and distribute it across 50 different application servers where it potentially might get compromised by an application administrator. I can keep them safe over here on the application gateway. Okay. I can apply rules. I can start saying, well, you know, who's allowed to connect? What IP addresses from where are allowed to connect into my applications based on the source IP address? Which of the backend servers should I be redirecting them to, etc., etc. Okay. I can start doing various intelligent routing decisions, more so than what a normal load balancer would have been able to do. Okay. So let's take the opportunity. I've now been killing you with PowerPoint for a while. Let's go and have a look at an application gateway. So what I've got is I have a couple of app services sitting inside of an Azure subscription. The most important thing I want you to notice of these is some of them are sitting in North Europe, some of them are sitting in the US. Okay, and I've given them names to really make it clear who they are. Okay, so second thing I want to show you is all of these services we're going to be looking at are published through the load balancing blade inside of your Azure console. Okay, so they've now made one place from where you can go and configure the load balancer, the front door, the application gateway, the traffic manager, and they basically give you like a little wizard to take you through the process of deciding which one of these you're going to be setting up. Okay, in our case, we're going to be going to an application gateway. And waiting for something to happen. By the way, the reason that it first of all asked us whether we're going to be using HTTPS is one of those services, the traffic manager, doesn't support HTTPS. Okay, so let's start creating, and I'm putting it into resource group 1. Give it a name. Okay, say where I'm going to be creating it. Okay, then I'm going to choose a tier. Okay, the tier is going to be important because A, it's going to determine some of the functionality that I can or cannot enable. Second of all, how much am I going to pay? Okay, so definitely you want to go for V2, which is newer than the classic tiers that you have over here. And probably, and we'll explain why later, you're going to want to go for the one that has the web application firewall enabled. You've got to choose this initially when you're setting it up because you can't go and add it again afterwards. Okay. Next thing you've got to choose is, do I want to do autoscaling? Let me explain what autoscaling is about. So when you deploy a web application firewall, it's essentially running like a server. Okay, it's a platform server. So you're never going to have to patch the operating system or do any configuration on the OS level. But the server has a certain amount of RAM and CPU allocated to it that is used to handle user connections. Okay, so when you choose one instance of the WAF, you could run into a situation where you run out of capacity, okay, and it can't handle the amount of connections coming in. So what you can do is you can set up an autoscale where you can say, look, at all times, I will want at least one instance of this to be running to handle any connections coming in. But then as I get more connections, keep on growing them up to a number. Okay, so when I go and price this service, it's important to look at this because in Azure, price becomes a technical factor. Okay, because if your service costs more than what the people want to pay, you don't get to run your service. Okay, so let's say, what does an app gateway cost me? South Africa North, And there I get those choices between my different tiers. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a normal application gateway. So let's just say a standard V2, 730 hours. In other words, 24 hours a day for all the months of all the days of the month. And I'm going to run one compute unit. Okay, so one instance of the application gateway. And they say that that one compute unit can handle 2,500 persistent connections or a 2.22 megabits per second throughput. Okay, if any of them are exceeded, then I'm running out of capacity on that device. Now I actually should have two of them. Okay, so now I can start saying, well, what's it going to cost me if I run two of them? And this is where you can see the base price, running it for a full month, $213. Every unit that I add on, you can see adds on another $6 or so worth. Okay, so I might say eventually, oh, I might be running up to 10 of them concurrently. Okay, the other price factor is how much data am I going to put through it? So outbound that I'm going to be publishing out. So let's say I'm going to do 1 terabyte a month. Okay, well, that's $110. So this whole thing, just as an application gateway, $382 a month. Okay, not free, not a massive amount of money either. Okay, for everything it's doing for you. Certainly less than you're going to be paying for most proper enterprise load balancers that you're going to deploy. Okay, so I'm back into this. So I go and say, so how many instances will I run? 1 to 10. Okay, then do I want to use availability zones? And if you're going to be possibly running more than one of them, yes, definitely you want to. What's availability zones? Data centers. Okay, so in a region, you probably have more than one location where Microsoft has a data center. Each one of those becomes an availability zone. If that data center goes down because the basement got flooded, okay, then that entire zone might go down, but you probably still have other zones running in the same region. Okay, so these days, high availability in Azure is all about making sure that you've got multi-zonal applications and that you distribute it across the zones. Okay, so you can have specific app gateways in specific zones, or in this case, if I have 10 instances and 3 zones, it's basically going to have a couple in 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Do I want to support HTTP 2? I'll probably say yes. And then a WAF policy. So because I chose that I want to do a app gateway with the web application firewall, I would have had to choose a WAF policy. For the moment, I'm just going to create a normal app gateway. Okay, and then what virtual network will I put this into? And again, I think it's because I'm busy choosing a network where I don't, or a region where I don't have anything. Let me go to North Europe. I've got stuff there. Let's go to VNet 1, and it uses a dedicated gateway called the App Gateway Subnet, which is where it's going to live and do its work. Okay. Now, when I start creating it, the first thing I've got to set up is going to be a front end. Okay, and the front end is a public IP address. So let me just create a new one. App Gateway 2-IP1. Okay, you can have multiple IPs on this. They're public IPs. This is how people are going to reach this app gateway. That IP address is the one you're eventually going to register in DNS as www.mycompany.com. Okay. Then you've got to set up your backends, and your backend pool is then, okay, what are the servers or services that you're going to be publishing through this? So let me give it an enormously creative name, and let's add some targets. So now I could add the IP address. Now, what's the IP address of what? Of anything I bloody want to. Okay, everything that I want to publish that's going to be sitting behind this application gateway. Now, that could be, if we look at this list, a virtual machine on this inside of my virtual network. could be a virtual machine scale set. It could be an app service. Okay, so let's pick a particular app service. But because I can add an IP address, I could also go and add an on-premises server sitting on my internal network. I could go and add a server sitting in another cloud. That's not necessarily an efficient way to do it, but I could. Okay, so if I have a device out there somewhere that's using a particular IP address, I could go and publish it through this app gateway. Okay. I think it's moaning because I'm busy mixing and matching. Okay. Then, if I've said this is my front end that will receive the traffic in, this is my back end that will receive the traffic being sent from the app gateway. In the middle, I now need to go and create a routing rule. And the routing rule is what needs to happen to that traffic on its way from one side to the next. Okay, so let's give it a creative name again. Give it a priority because I might have multiple rules that conflict. And, you know, if there's conflicting rules, I've got to choose which one's the applicable one. Now I create a listener. Okay, and the listener is, think of it as a port that's sitting on that app gateway. Okay, that listener will be tied to my public or a private IP address. It will be listening out for HTTP or HTTPS. Okay, and if I'm going to choose HTTPS, I'm also going to have to go and import a certificate. So I'm going to be lazy and say that this is just going to be for HTTP. And I can also say this is going to be a multi-site listener. So this same listener could be listening out for www.contoso.com, server1.contoso.com, apix.contoso.com, www.fabricam.com, and. Okay, I could have a whole army of applications and servers sitting behind this. I just have to make sure I've got certificates for them. Okay, and then let's just go back to a basic. Okay, then I have to say, okay, backend targets. So my target is the backend pool, and then backend settings. And I'll show you backend settings. New. That's where I go and set just rules that say things like, am I doing cookie-based affinity for load balancing? If you've ever worked with load balancers, you'll know about affinity. That's what makes sure that if I have 5 web servers and I want that user 1, if they were connecting to server 1 previously, when they reconnect, they must go back to server 1, then I use a cookie to track and say, ensure that they keep on going back to the same server. Sometimes your application is going to get very, very confused if when the user initially connects, they go to server 1. If they hit F5 refresh, they're suddenly connecting to server 2 and the whole application state is mixed up. Okay. I can also go and set up draining to ensure that if I want to take down a server, again, I can get it drained and within X number of seconds, the connections to it will be dropped. Okay. I can also do hostname rewrites. So if I'm hosting company1.com, company2.com, company3.com, company4.com, but at the back end, my servers are actually configured as corp.contoso.com. And I want that whatever the URL is that the user is connecting in with, that host name must be inside of the header of the request must be rewritten to what the actual server name is. Then I can specify a different domain name that must be substituted as the connections come in. Okay, so this is where I'm doing the actual making the sausage of my load balancing. Okay, and then it's the normal, create some tags if I need it, and I create, and I've got a application gateway. Okay, so inside of my application gateway, now let's go to one that I've set up previously. I'm cheating. Okay, this is the same way that they do on cooking shows. They didn't actually make that souffle while you were busy watching. Okay, so inside of this app gateway, first of all, by the way, it now gives you really nice stats to see exactly what's the throughput, how much traffic is busy coming through, how many connections are being made, what connections are failing, how many connections, etc., etc. And that's sometimes really useful information because you're getting it in one place. You didn't have to go and query every single application server and add it together. Okay, so that's sometimes useful just as both a troubleshooting mechanism and a way to set up alerting. If you suddenly find that your connections drop to 0, something bad is going on. Okay, and now, as I start going through the connections, I'm going to skip the web application firewall for the moment, but now I can add extra things into my backend pools. Okay, and my backend pools is determining who am I busy connecting to. Okay, then the backend settings, those are those routing rules that I'm setting up. Okay, also the listeners, those are the front end ports that I'm busy listening out for and where I am binding different certificates that people are using to connect to me. Okay, and then in the rules, there I can start specifying, well, when traffic is coming in, how does it get routed to what at the back end, what backend targets, etc. And I can also go and configure rewrites, okay, where I can go and say, take a particular string inside of the header that's busy coming in and turn it into something else when you're sending it to the backend. Okay, so I can do a lot of the stuff that if you ever worked on things like the old proxies, the TMG and the UAG from Microsoft, you can see I'm now able to do that in the cloud inside of this service. Okay, and then lastly, health probes. So this is how I know that the servers at the back end are alive, because I send them requests. And I can go and specify a health probe where I can say, well, what sort of request am I sending? How often am I sending it? And what am I looking for to know that the server at the back end is healthy and I can send traffic to it, or it's down and I shouldn't send traffic to it. Okay. And that's essentially the bones of doing a application gateway. Okay. So those components that I showed you, you choose a front-end IP address. Okay, and you can have multiple IPs if you need it, but it also allows you to share one IP between multiple application servers. Okay, the listener that says, well, what am I listening out for? And this is where I can say, well, I'm listening out for a particular, not just an IP, but a particular URL. Okay, and then the routing rules, it says, well, based on that URL that came in, where do I send it? Which backend pool? Okay, and the backend pools could be multiple web servers, app services, functions, could be Kubernetes clusters, could be on-premises servers. Okay. So App Gateway version 2, you saw that as we were selecting it, that we got the choice to create multiple different versions of the App Gateway. So a couple of the things that got added in V2, which is why you want to have it, is this auto-scaling, where you can make it increase or decrease the number of these servers. And that is really important from a scalability point of view, because it means that you're never going to get users whose connections just get dropped because your front end can't handle the punch. Okay, which also helps you with things like DDoS. Okay, because again, there's multiple servers handling incoming connections. Zone redundancy, so I can handle an entire zone going down. Static VIP. In the past, the IP address might change on your app gateway, and that caused havoc with DNS registrations. Now you can have a static virtual IP. You can do header rewrites, as I mentioned. It's faster to provision, and it has, depending on the parameter you're looking at, it's possibly 5 times as fast, even before you start adding in the benefit of the scale out. Okay. Now, the alternate way to do it is Front Door. And Front Door is very similar but different. Okay, again, it's a layer 7 device. It receives requests coming in and then redistributes them based on routing rules to endpoints. Okay, but first difference is this doesn't live inside of your Azure subscription, inside of a virtual network. Okay, so it's not a virtual appliance that actually gets deployed. This is a proper cloud service like the Azure SQL service that is running at Microsoft, and in fact, doesn't run inside of a single data center. They've got, or inside of a single region, they've got it, instances of it in every single region. Okay. And what gets special is the IP address that gets the front end IP that gets allocated to your front door instance is now actually shared across multiple regions. Okay. They use what they call an anycast protocol. So they will receive requests coming into that IP address and then redirect them to multiple places around the world. So now this allows me to be publishing servers in Azure Region 1, Region 2, Region 3, Region 4. So South Africa, Japan, Europe, North America, and requests coming in can then get routed to different regions, for instance, to allow better performance by redirecting people to the web server instance that's closest to them, as an example. Or fault tolerance, if I lose an entire region, then all of the traffic that was being redirected, that was being sent to region 1 can now be redirected to region 2. Okay, so this becomes a multi-regional load balancer. At the same time, it's also integrated with that content delivery network service that I mentioned earlier on. Remember the one where some of the static content from your web applications can be cached at Microsoft in storage services. And when users are accessing your application, accessing your sites, some of that static content, like the images in your web application, can now be serviced out of the CDN instead of fetching it from the web servers. Okay, Front Door takes that CDN service and integrates it, so it can also act as your CDN. Okay, so simultaneously, it's a load balancer and it's a CDN, and it then provides security because, like the app gateway, it can also integrate with the web application firewall. Okay, so one of the important choices that you have to make at the end of the day is, if I'm going to be publishing my web application, will I be publishing it through application gateway, or will I be publishing it through Front Door? Okay, and the single biggest factor that should guide your decision making there is, where are my applications? Okay, in application gateway, it's essentially publishing things in Azure in a single region. The Front Door, though, okay, could be publishing multiple regions, on-premises servers, servers outside of Azure. You could be publishing servers sitting in Google and AWS via your Front Door, and it will quite happily redirect traffic to there. Okay, so it can also become, as they say over here, this sort of single central control plane for all of your global traffic. Okay, so you begin to build like a global traffic cop and a global caching service and a global security service for your web estate across multiple locations. Okay, so looking at some of the features, why would I be doing this? So accelerating application performance, because I've got this CDN integrated into it. Increase application availability, okay, with the multiple locations, and where it's doing health probes like the app gateway to detect whether the server instance in region 1 is up. If it's not, well, let's start redirecting the traffic to region 2, etc. URL-based routing again, so not just saying, oh, all traffic for this IP address goes there, but it can say, okay, if this is going to contoso.com/search, send it here. If it's going to contoso.com/statistics, send it somewhere else. Okay, so unpack the whole URL and make routing decisions based on that. Multiple site hosting across multiple regions, multiple clouds, multiple on-premise locations. Handle session affinity. Again, some of this common with App Gateway. Okay, Ssl termination. So again, I can have my wildcard certificate installed on the Front Door service. The SSL request terminates there, and then it inspects that traffic, sees if there's any security issues with it, and then maybe sends it back either unencrypted HTTP or HTTPS with a totally different certificate to the actual application server at the back end, which can simplify my certificate management on these back-end servers. Okay. Application layer security, again, because it's a layer 7 device and it understands protocols, it can look with the web application firewall for dangerous HTTP requests, okay, and filter them out. Do rewrites, So very similar to App Gateway, but running as a pure cloud service and at a global scale. Okay, so choosing between these. So I showed you this screen already. So if you go into your Azure console and you go search for load balancer or load balancing, you're going to get to this page, and then they're going to give you all of these different choices, and then you've got to try and make a choice between them. Okay, in the documentation, I grab these two things out of the doco. First of all, they go and say to you, generally, first question you have to ask yourself, is this a global or a regional implementation? Okay, so is it going to be inside of a single region, or is it going to be across multiple regions? If it's going to be multiple regions, then you should be looking at Front Door. If it's going to be in a single region, you should be looking at Application Gateway. Okay, and then you need to say, well, what's my protocols? For non-HTTPS, I could be looking at Traffic Manager, which is a lot less functionality. It's really just a global DNS load balancer. So if I'm doing global multi-regional websites or web applications, then Front Door is really my best choice. Okay, the load balancer is one advantage it's got. It's not limited. It's not a layer 7 application layer device. So it's not limited to HTTP or HTTPS. So if I need to load balance FTP servers or SMTP mail relays or SSH servers or something else, then I could be using the load balancer. Okay, but otherwise, the Application Gateway is going to be your best bet, because it's going to have a lot of extra functionality built into it for understanding the protocol and doing intelligent routing of that traffic. Okay, so there's this whole decision tree. You can go look it up in the docker. Okay, you'll find it there if you go search for any one of these technologies. So this is one of the important sets of decisions you've got to be able to take. Certainly, any of you that are interested in doing any of the Azure certification, they love asking you questions in there where they say, here's your scenario. Which one of these services should you deploy to load balance application A and application B? Okay, and then based on those circumstances, you need to apply this decision tree. Okay. Okay, so now let's go beyond load balancing and start getting into the actual security and specifically the web application firewall. So with both those services, you saw I've got the ability that I can go in and I can go integrate the WAF. Okay, so what is the WAF? Okay, the WAF is a layer 7 web application firewall that can look at traffic, HTTP or HTTPS, that is being sent through one of these services, unpack it, apply security rules, and then try and identify dangerous traffic and filter it out. Okay, so as I pointed out, it integrates at global level with the Front Door service, or at a regional level with the Application Gateway. Okay, it's essentially the same service, but you will see there are some slight functional differences in what the WAF can do between these two. In fact, they've now also added on the option that if you have the CDN, you can also integrate the WAF into that. But then it's really just looking at CDN requests and seeing if they're safe or not. Okay. So it is a good idea, and it's very likely that if you're going to be deploying Front Door or Application Gateway, that you will choose the option to deploy them with the WAF. Okay. So what is the WAF doing? The WAF is looking inside of the traffic, and it's looking for security threats. It is specifically looking for Owasp. Okay, so that remember the Open Web Application Security program, project. So it's looking for potential requests that are coming in that might be violating any of those standards. So let's take a look at its actual configuration. So let me go back into my app gateway, and I go up to security, web application firewall, and there's a WAF policy that I've created. I can have multiple WAF policies, or I can share one WAF policy between multiple app gateways. The only thing that I've got to do is if I have Front Door and I have App Gateway, I will have to have a WAF policy for App Gateway and a WAF policy for Front Door. Okay, so let's go into that policy. I just noticed the question from Otto. It says, so App Gateway deployments without the WAF. You can do that, but then it essentially has no security functionality. Then it's purely a glorified load balancer. Okay, so if your requirement is not security, you could be using an app gateway for that. But the moment that you've got a security requirement, you really should be looking at integrating the WAF. You might be seeing scenarios where an organization either has, let's say, a front door, traffic is getting routed through that and then hitting the app gateway, or they might be using a third-party service like, just trying to remember, name escapes me now, but it's very similar to Front Door, but it's not from Microsoft. Okay, there are alternatives. Okay, so then you might choose to use the app gateway, but typically when you're deploying an app gateway, you will have the WAF on it. Okay, so let's have a look at this WAF policy. So things that I can configure in here is, first of all, let's just go to Cloudflare. Yes, thank you, Otto. And I think the organization where you're busy deploying at the moment is using Cloudflare, which is sort of a Front Door equivalent that's not from Microsoft. Okay, so you can do some basic configuration to, for instance, say, I want to have maximum request size. You know, sometimes with DDoS, somebody might try and flood you with very large packets or very large transactions. Okay, then manage rules. So this is really the sort of meat and potatoes of the web application firewall. Okay, because this is where I can go and configure my managed rule set. Okay, and there are multiple of these rule sets available. The most important of them are what I mentioned before, the Owasp. Okay, and there's different versions of it. The latest one that it supports is Owasp 3.2, and that's got 185 controls inside of it that you can read this as well as what I can. I'm not going to be sitting here reading 185 rules to you, but you can see the idea. What it's busy looking for is, it's like an old-fashioned antivirus. It's looking for patterns. It's looking for particular behavior that would indicate somebody doing something potentially dangerous, possibly exploiting something in a back-end server or service. Okay, so whole bunch of these. Now, when you're implementing, the first thing you've got to choose is, well, do I want to, which version of Owasp do I want to try and enable? And then I can start saying, well, maybe there are some of these controls that I do or don't want. Okay, in fact, maybe one of these breaks something in one of my applications. Then what I can do is I can go and say, that particular rule, I'm going to disable it. Okay, it's not going to work. And this is where one of the things that I can do is I can actually create multiple WAF policies in version 2 that have different sets of rules, and I can route different sets of traffic in different ways. Okay, so that perhaps application 1 gets broken by certain controls, application 2 is not affected by those controls, so I can have different policies that apply to different sets of applications. Okay. Next thing, it's also very important to understand, and Otto again just made a statement over there where he said extreme caution and knowledge is needed when enabling these Owasp rules. Okay, because you're probably going to break certain things. Okay, because developers are very curious people, and developers will sometimes do things in their applications where they are using a security vulnerability as a feature. Okay, and their entire application functionality depends on the users being able to do something incredibly dangerous. Okay, so when you switch on the WAF, it actually initially gets deployed in monitoring only mode. Okay, so it's in detection mode, and it's taking all of these requests that are coming in and it's logging them. So if it found a vulnerability, it put it into the log, and it's up to you to go and investigate the log and try and understand what you're looking at. And when you've tested this for a while and you understand that the rule set that is now configured is safe, then you can come here and you can go and say, I'm going to switch to prevention mode. And that is a very scary moment when you press that button. And I'm only pressing it so casually because I know this is a test system with nothing behind it. Okay, because once I go into prevention mode, now it will actually start, based on those management rules, blocking traffic, and you'll find stuff possibly start breaking. Okay, so important for you to go through a big testing exercise with your applications, evaluating and figuring out and tweaking and enabling and disabling particular rules until you've got it working for you. Okay, other thing that you can do inside of here is with your assignments, you can also go and assign this, the bot manager rule set. Okay, and the bot manager rule set is the rules that sits and looks for bots. Remember I told you about bots earlier on, which are pieces of applications that are out there that are busy connecting to servers and doing various things. Okay, so here again, it goes and finds known bad bots, okay, and tries to block them. And it gets that information from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Service, which is busy evaluating thousands of people's servers and trying to identify IP addresses that are being misused. Okay, and again, you switch that on, you're possibly going to get stuff breaking. Okay, so you can also go and create custom rules. Okay, so custom rule is where you go in and you go and put in something that is unique to you. Okay, so now we can say, based on a certain IP address or a certain string inside of a HTTP request, or, and this one is popular, based on a geolocation. Let's go pick that one as an example. Come on. So if I want to say, I only want to allow traffic from South Africa. I don't want to allow traffic from South Africa. Let's pick on Azerbaijan. Okay, so if I want to block Azerbaijan, then this is the way I would go and set up that rule. Okay, and now any request comes in, it goes and translates the IP address, it does a geo lookup. Of course, this is not going to protect me against somebody using a VPN. They're sitting in Azerbaijan and they look like they're coming to me from Albania. Okay, but it is going to allow me to apply particular rules based on just pure IP address, normal assignments. Okay, then the application gateway. So I can have multiple gateways that are associated with the same policy. Okay, and that's essentially my WAF. Okay, inside of my front door, very much the same thing. The only difference is that in my front door, let's go and find a front door, there's going to be a couple of the settings that are going to be slightly different in terms of what I can configure inside of the WAF. Something that is important to know about is there are different front door tiers. Okay, so let's go back into that pricing calculator again. So let's go and add a front door. So up until about a year ago, there was just one type of front door. It's what they call here the front door classic. Okay, they had pretty much the same functionality for everybody. What they have now is and by the way, the region that you choose here is just where's the service really homed, but it is available then in every region. So then standard or premium. Okay, so if I choose standard, it has less of the security functionality. Okay, if you go search on the web, just do a search engine, and you'll find an article that compares the front door standard and premium, and you're going to see there's some of these security features, like the managed rule set, like the bot protection, that is not available in the standard tier. They're only available if you spend a little bit of extra money, and you go for a premium. Okay, so how much is the difference? So you'll see a basic front door standard is actually quite cheap. Okay, so for 1 million requests, and let's make this, what you pay for most is for the amount of data. Okay, so if you're sending 5 terabytes from the edge to the client, so from front door to the clients, and from front door to the backend servers, then that's about $1,000. Okay, but if you bump this up to premium tier, then that adds about another $300. So still not a massive amount of money that you're spending for somebody that's busy doing 5 terabytes worth of web traffic. You're probably doing something that's already pretty heavy and is hopefully making you some money. Okay, so then that money is worth it. Obviously, the less data you've got going through, the less you're going to pay. Okay. So the front door, also in security, you go and enable the web application firewall, and you have to associate a WAF policy. Okay, and it's got very much the same settings as what we saw for the application gateway. Okay, so you can mix and match. You can combine various of these security resources. So you could have a front door controlling traffic between your regions with the WAF integrated, and then you have a app gateway in your region that's controlling the load balancing within that region, and it also has the WAF integrated in it. And it sort of becomes a case of, it's a bit like having your parachute and your reserve parachute. Okay, it's multiple layers of protection, and all of them then looking for and protecting you against DDoS, web application attacks, malicious bots, etc. Okay, this is less common. Okay, because obviously you're adding expense, you're possibly even imposing a bit of a security penalty. So you're typically going to say, I need my web application firewall one place or the other. Okay, so here again is a decision tree, and it sort of walks you through where you're going to put your WAF. Okay, and it's very much a case of, if you have front door, the WAF inside of App Gateway, I think, is a little bit more mature, been around a bit longer, it has better functionality. Some of the functionality has only just recently come out, like the full Owasp support and the botnet detection in the front door. Okay, so if possible, put your WAF into your app gateway. But if you only have front door, well, then put the WAF into the front door. Okay. Right, then the other security service that we wanted to quickly look at was just Ddos Protection. Okay, so just to recap again, so what is DDoS? You can read the slide as well as I can. I'm not going to sit here and read these figures to you, but they're a big problem out on the internet, and they have been for the longest of time. Okay, they are not new. Okay, we've had DDoS attacks probably from 10 minutes after the internet was invented. Okay, so and they're very common also because they're really easy to organize. Okay, you just get somebody who's got an army of machines that are remote controlled, and you pay them the money and they run your script and they launch an attack against whatever IP address, and they can cause a lot of harm. Okay, a couple of South African companies, if you go search for DDoS South Africa, you're going to find a couple of South African firms that have had major downtimes. A couple of the ISPs were being taken out about 2 years ago. And the attack trends, theoretically, they're just getting more and more and more. Okay, so DDoS attack types, there's various flavors of this. Sometimes it's just volumetric. They just send a huge amount of traffic, big files. They just flood your internet link. Other times they're protocol attacks. They go look for particular transactions that use up a lot of your server resources just to make your servers work harder. And sometimes they're resource attacks where they're using some sort of vulnerability in your server or in your application or in your network equipment to, again, just cause something to go down or cause it to not be able to handle. So, you know, some sort of request to your web server that causes your CPU utilization to just spike to 100%, as an example, could be a very effective DDoS attack. Okay. So how does Microsoft help against this? So First of all, by the pure size of the Microsoft network, they're already relatively protected against most feasible DDoS attacks. Okay, nobody is going to be able to put together an attack that will take down all of Microsoft. We hope. Okay, let's not make predictions we can't be held to. But they have very large capacity and they're very spread out, and it's going to be really, really difficult to somebody to take down all of Microsoft. So Microsoft already does a certain amount of built-in DDoS protection. Okay, they already analyze all of the traffic coming in to all of their networks and to all of the customer networks, and they build up patterns and they look for what does normal traffic look like. And if it suddenly changes, if you used to get a gigabyte of data being uploaded and downloaded per day, and suddenly you go to 100 gigabytes, then they're going to go, let's set off an alarm and let's go and have a look at it and let's see if there's some sort of pattern that matches a DDoS attack and let's filter it out. Okay. But the free service is free. Okay. There are still limits to what the DDoS free service can do for you. Okay. So if you compare, so spoiler alert, so Microsoft has this extra level in DDoS called Ddos Protection Standard, which you will pay for, which will do extra things for you. Okay, and what do you pay for? Because in the Ddos Protection Standard, they don't just look for DDoS protection across your entire infrastructure, but they will actually get it down to particular servers and applications or networks that Microsoft is busy profiling, looking at what does the traffic look like going to that server, okay? And if it, again, picks up a change, if it picks up dangerous traffic, then try and tune that out and try and get rid of it, okay? And beyond just automated actions, Microsoft even then has a specific support agreement. They have a specific SLA for the servers or the services that you are busy protecting with DDoS standard. They even have a response team that specifically is geared towards fighting DDoS attacks, that if they detect a DDoS attack and you're on DDoS protection standard, they will then jump in and they will start analyzing and they will fight and go and try and kill off this attack. Okay. So what does this privilege cost you? A little bit. Let me show you what a little bit looks like. Go into the pricing calculator and let's hoist some DDoS. And you will see that base price for 100 resources, $2,943 a month. Okay, so if again you've got a major web estate, you've got a lot of stuff that's being accessed through the internet and you're really dependent on it, well then that's possibly money very well spent. Okay, if you're Bob's Pie Shop, you have one web server, might be a tad on the expensive side. Okay, then you might say, okay, I will depend on the free DDoS service, and I'll maybe put my servers against behind Front Door or App Gateway that also have a certain amount of DDoS protection built into them. Okay, but when you start getting enterprise scale, then you go to this level. And if you go beyond the 100 resources, well, then essentially for $29 a pop, you can go add vast amounts of additional resources. Okay, so to enable this, you come here and you go create a DDoS protection plan. Okay, that basically just says, I am subscribing to DDoS protection standard. Okay, and once you switch that on, and by the way, really interesting how they immediately say to you, please be warned, this makes you liable for costs incurred. Okay. Then inside of your resources, so let's say on a virtual network, I can then go and switch on the higher level of DDoS protection. So let's pick a virtual network. And inside of the settings, there'll be, I think it's under security. There it is, DDoS protection. I'll be able to choose which DDoS protection plan I wish to associate this network with. And then everything in this virtual network will be protected. Okay, and I can apply DDoS protection to particular networks or subnets or resources even. Okay. Something else from a security point of view that's just worth noting about. I can't talk about security without talking about Sentinel because I freaking love it. Okay, so Sentinel is my SIEM from Microsoft, so security, ingestion, and event management. Okay, so what Sentinel does is it sucks in logs from various things, and inside of those logs looks for security events and correlates security events across multiple services, and then creates incidents, and based on the incidents, it will send out alerts, and it will try and do automated remediation. It will try and find threats and kill them off. So this is like having a full-time security analyst or team of analysts sitting looking at everything in your environment 24/7. Okay, so you can use Sentinel to analyze many things in your Azure environment. You just go and switch on the Azure connector. And specifically, if you're looking at the Azure connectors that you can enable, you will see that there's a connector for Web Application Firewall. Okay, there's one for DDoS Protection. So if you're using those services as part of your security solution, really good idea. Deploy Sentinel, deploy these connectors. It will then suck in the logs from those services, look for security events. So look for dangerous traffic being detected by your Web Application Firewall, and then generate alerts, generate incidents, report on them in workbooks. So it gives you really cool reporting on what is the security state, allows you to then do automation, automated cleaning up of some of those security events. Okay, so this just really rounds out that security solution to then go and add Sentinel onto it as well. Okay. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about tonight. Anybody got questions, queries, or comments? We have 4 minutes.
That was awesome, dude.
Okay, there was many comments being typed, half of them by Otto Beekman, who I think has seen things. I know where he works. He has seen things. Okay. Any of the questions that came out that particularly needed to, that anybody wanted us to quickly try and address? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Happiness is.
That was awesome. Super awesome. Can everybody hear me? I'm guessing not.
Well, they might be hearing you, but they can only respond in text.
No,
The only
that's
downside
fantastic.
of using YouTube.
Yeah, for sure. Well, at least
Well,
they can.
next month it's much better. Next month, all of you show up at Microsoft. We'll probably
Yes.
feed you pizza.
100%. Yes, we will be back in person as of next month again. So I think now that everything's all opened up, yes, please. Warren is working in the dark room. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, 100%. Please join us in person. And I think, Andre, do you want another session? That was great.
Again.
And I think, to be honest, I mean, more than anything else, feedback is greatly appreciated. So I think if there's anything that you guys would like to see or hear, or alternatively,
guys, get onto that meetup group and hoy comments there. You know, if it's like, you know, I am really interested in, you know, or can we find out more about, or can we get a better quality of speaker, or you know,
or if you would like to speak yourself, to be honest. I mean,
and in fact, there's a couple of people in this meeting. Some of those people that were talking a lot in the comment section have a lot to share.
Ah, look at that. Yes, let's do it. You know what, John, there's some stuff that you've been working on that I would love to see. Yeah. So, yes, definitely.
Jonathan DevOps has got some killer functionality. Okay. Cool beans. Okay, so and if you do want to see the revamped Microsoft offices in person, you can go tomorrow because the Microsoft 365 user group had the intelligence to move theirs to Wednesday evening.
Yeah.
They
Cool.
started about 4:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, we did. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining, Andre. Thank you again. And we hope to see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Cool peoples.
Ciao, ciao.